Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. And we will welcome to Vatican City to today's Global Town Hall Pilgrims of Hope, a Jubilee inspiration for action on debt, climate, and development, hosted by Caritas Internationalis and the Vatican Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. My name is Alfonso Apicella, and I serve as Senior Officer for Global Advocacy Campaigns at Caritas Internationalis. I have the honor of leading our Jubilee campaign, Turn Debt into Hope, which a growing number of Caritas and partner organizations launched on the 23rd of December 2024, encouragement of Pope Francis. Since then, this campaign has been drawing together voices and efforts from across the Caritas Confederation and beyond, as well as from faith and civil society organizations from around the world. Today's Town Hall marks an important milestone. We are halfway through the Jubilee year, celebrating the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si. This is a moment to reflect on where we've come, reconnect with one another, supported by a lineup of inspiring panelists to regain momentum, as we look to a number of key political moments for democracy and campaigning later in the year. So before we begin, just a few practical notes to help us move smoothly through. So we kindly ask everyone to keep their microphones and cameras turned off, so you have a speaking role. This will help ensure a clear and flow for all 360 people who have registered. Thank you so much. Please share a thought, ask a question, or contribute to the discussion. Please feel free to use the chat function, which will, however, be temporarily disabled during the presentations as distractions. But this will be reopened during the event, and we'll really welcome your engagement. Thank you again for that. Should you encounter any technical difficulties during the session, you can direct message Alonso de Llanes and Maureen Villanueva by looking them up in the participant list, and they'll do their best to assist you. And big thank you to both of them from the Laudato Si Action platform for helping us today. Please note that this event, as you've noticed, is being recorded and will be shared afterwards for those who weren't able to join us live. Also, streaming on YouTube. And finally, we're pleased to offer simultaneous translation in Spanish and French. So to access it, simply click the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom window and select your preferred. If you choose not to select this language channel, you continue to hear the original floor audio. Note for any journalists or media officers joining us today, General Alistair Dutton, he will be available after the event from 4 p.m. Rome time. If you're interested in arranging a conversation with him, please look up Susan Darbus, our news and media officer at Caritas Internationalis in the participant. She'll be happy to help coordinate. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's conversation, Joshua McElwee. Joshua is currently the Vatican correspondent for the Global Reuters news agency. He was previously the news editor and Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic in the US. He is reported widely on the Vatican and the global church and traveled many times with Pope Francis. So we're grateful to have him with us today with our dialogue. Welcome, Joshua, and over to you.
Hello, it's nice to meet you all. I'm very happy to be here and to help Caritas with this important event. I'm also based in Rome, where we're kind of experiencing early summer, so it's very nice. My job today is really just to help introduce the speakers and be available as we take questions at the end to help facilitate those questions. It's about an hour-long event with several speakers, and then there will be time for questions and answer at the end. There are 3 different sections to the event. The first will be on elevating the ethical foundations and church teachings that call for renewed commitment to justice and solidarity in the current debt crisis. The second will be about building support for transformative reforms ahead of key multilateral moments this year. And the third and final section will be about engaging communities, the church, and Caritas networks to amplify the call for change and sustained global momentum. Our first address today will come from the Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis, Mr. Alistair Dutton, who has been in that role since 2023 and brings over 2 decades of humanitarian and development exercise to his role. He is a seasoned leader in global relief and humanitarian work and previously served as the Chief Executive of Caritas Scotland and has worked across Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. So, Alistair, I think it's your time for opening remarks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joshua, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you all are. It's wonderful to have so many of you online all around. Caritas constantly endeavours to be a voice for the voiceless and to ensure that their voices are heard. And in our conversations with members and people, particularly in the poorest countries of the world in recent times, been absolutely clear in telling us that one of the greatest difficulties they face and the greatest injustices they face is that of debt distress. It is surely a scandal of our age that 3.3 billion people today live in countries where the government spends more on interest payments than it does on health, education, and other public services. Debts are crippling these countries and preventing governments from being able to help people and to allow the lives that people deserve in justice. It is therefore that this year, in this Jubilee year of hope for the Holy See, we have chosen to launch our campaign and make the issue that we're working closely that of dealing with debt justice and debt distress. Pope Francis, throughout his pontificate, often talking about economic justice and the moral imperative, the measure of our common humanity, as to our economic system feeds humanity rather than humanity being at the service of our ecosystem. And I think just from that very brief description of debt distress, it's clear to me that in the question of debt, by putting interest payments above healthcare and education, people are secondary, are subservient to economic justice and economic interests, rather. As Alfonso mentioned, we're celebrating at the moment the 10-year anniversary of Laudato Si, which is often talked about or thought of as the big ecological papal encyclical. But in fact, it was much more than that. It was a much broader social and ecological encyclical. And Pope Francis was absolutely clear. There aren't two crises in this world. There is one. There isn't an ecological crisis and a social crisis. It is to do with the way that we as humanity no longer place humanity at the center of our endeavors, and how that then plays out in the social problems that we face, but the economic ones. Pope Francis was very supportive of us taking up this campaign, and at the beginning of this Jubilee year, on the 1st of January, he endorsed the campaign and talked about the need to tackle global debt. In Spes non confundit, he went even further and said, if we really wish to prepare a path to peace in our world, we must commit ourselves to remedying the remote causes of injustice, settling unjust and unpayable debts. And so he was very clear that debt is one of the defining issues of our age. And I'm not surprised, but equally happy to see that Pope Leo has already indicated that he shares this concern and shares the desire to work on tackling debt injustice and debt distress. I think with that, I'd much rather spend the time hearing from the amazing panel of speakers that we have before us today. I'd like to thank them on your behalf, and I'd like to thank you all for being with us this afternoon. It's a pleasure to see so many people spread around the globe to welcome you all as we consider this important issue. So thank you all very much, and back to you, Josh.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the substantive but brief overview to help lay out the afternoon we have together here today. We're going to go next to the Vatican, and we'll have an introduction to the Vatican's perspective on some of these issues from Sister Alessandra Smerili at the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. Sister Smerili is an economist and a professor of political economy at the Pontifical Faculty of Educational Sciences, Auxilium, where she has played a leading role in Vatican initiatives on the economy, ecology, and social justice. She was also previously a coordinator of the Vatican's COVID-19 Commission. Sister Smerili, here's to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and thank you very much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you today to address a topic of great importance to both Caritas, as we listen to the Secretary General, and the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. I'm grateful to Archbishop Monsignor Gabriele Caccia, the permanent observers of the Holy See to the United Nations in New York, and the Cardinal Spengler for their presence today. And I'm happy to listen to something about the preparation and the path toward COP30, because I would say that since I'm being involved in this process, as Dicastery, we are accompanying the processes toward the various COP. This is the first time the local church, the Brazilian church, is deeply involved in preparing the COP, not just the official gathering, but also to involve Catholic and social organizations. And so we are very happy and grateful for that. As we all know very well, the issue we are addressing today is at the heart of many global conversations, and it is central to the Church's mission of justice and solidarity. And so I express also my sincere gratitude to Caritas for its leadership in convening this important event and for the vital work it has carried out over the past year, particularly through the campaign we mentioned, Turn Debt into Hope, which has played a significant role in raising awareness within the Church, across civil society, and around the world about the urgency of addressing debt crisis with compassion, creativity, and justice. And as we gather to reflect on global debt and its impact, we must begin with a foundational belief. Development worthy of the human person must be grounded in justice, equity, and the protection of human dignity. This is a core conviction we hold at the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, and it shapes how we approach the challenges of debt, inequality, and ecological degradation. Integral human development means ensuring that every person, no one excluded, can live a full and dignified life. As we recall and as we read in the Gospel, John 10:10, I've come that they might have life and habits to the full. Life to the full. This is integral human development. And this entails access not only to basic needs like food, health, and education, but also opportunities, justice, and a healthy environment. However, for many countries that face the trap of unsustainable debt, this vision remains elusive. In fact, when a large portion or even the majority in some cases of national resources is allocated to debt repayment, little to nothing is left for essential public services. When governments are forced to cut vital services due to debt burdens, it is the most disadvantaged who suffer first and most, those dependent on public education, healthcare, clean water, and basic infrastructure. And as we celebrate this week the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si and reflect on this enduring legacy, we are reminded of Pope Francis' prophetic words, already quoted by Alistair Dutton, the secretary, the General Secretary of Caritas. We are faced not with two separate crises, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. And this is especially evident in many countries of the global south, where financial debt and ecological devastation go hand in hand. These nations are burdened with unsustainable debt repayments while suffering the worst consequences of climate change: drought, floods, biodiversity loss, and food insecurity. And as Pope Francis also affirmed in Laudato Si, a true ecological debt exists, particularly between the global north and south, connected to the commercial imbalance with effect on the environment and the disproportionate use of natural resources by certain countries over long periods of time. And the ecological debt, and as the dicastery, we are trying to go deeper into this concept. It's not solely about carbon emissions. It includes destructive practices such extractive minings, exporting toxic waste, exploiting weak environmental protections in poorer countries. These harms deplete ecosystems and strip nations of the resources needed for sustainable development. And so that is the message I want to address to you, to say to you, is at its core, both financial and ecological debt stem from the same unjust global system, one that extracts wealth and natural resources from the south and concentrates them to the north. As a result, the poorest countries are paying twice, one through debt obligations, and again through environmental degradation and lost futures. Recognizing that ecological and financial debt are deeply connected can provide different and clearer lens for addressing the challenges we are talking about. It is a call for responsibility, a call for change. But I don't want to speak too much. And so in this vein, addressing debt and sustainability is not just a financial issue, it's a moral and spiritual imperative. The Catholic Church has long been engaged in this mission, from the Jubilee year of 2000 to today's Jubilees of Hope. It has consistently called for a new and more just global financial architecture. This is an essential step towards realizing the Church's vision of integral human development, where every person can live with dignity, peace, and harmony with creation. So thank you for your attention. I wish you a fruitful exchange of ideas, experiences, and best practices, and success in your important international efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Smarilli, for raising up the Vatican's point of view on human dignity and on the rights of every person to have a full and dignified life. Our next speaker is going to be Cardinal Jaime Spangler, who is the Archbishop of Porto Alegre, a diocese of 2.4 million Catholics in Brazil. He is also president of both the National Conference of Bishops of Brazil and the Latin American Episcopal Council, known as CELAM. A Franciscan, he has been a prominent voice in the Brazilian Church on issues of social justice, indigenous and human rights, and environmental protection. And he'll be speaking about the Jubilee principles coming toward the COP30 meeting this year. Thank you, Cardinal Spangler.
Buenos dias, buongiorno, good morning, guten Morgen, bonjour, bom dia. Yo estoy en el Río de Janeiro. Tenemos acá la Asamblea General del CELAM. Y mañana celebraremos el aniversario, los 10 años de la Laudato Si junto al Cristo Redentor. Bien, yo no hablo inglés. Hablaré en español despacito, ¿ok? El tema que me he estado solicitado, la esperanza y el sueño de la remisión entre la deuda pública y la deuda ecológica. La esperanza es el sueño del hombre despierto. Famosa frase del filósofo Aristóteles está planteada de una manera que con capacidad y determinación pueden alcanzarse los sueños. Sin embargo, el filósofo no alcanzó la trascendencia de la llama de la resurrección y la búsqueda de las promesas de Dios, una justificación para el mundo, para transformarlo por la fuerza de la presencia de Dios en nosotros. Es esta esperanza la que nos mueve como iglesia. Frente a la vida que nos trae la resurrección, frente a la esperanza de la cruz, necesitamos sostener la vida que vence a la muerte, con certeza a través de la promesa de la venida del Señor. Es lo que despierta en nosotros la esperanza de vivir, lo que nos impulsiona. Frente a los desafíos globales, el papel de la Iglesia Católica es despertar sueños. Estamos traspasando tiempos en los que la justicia económica y socioambiental está bajo la sombra de la indiferencia y la muerte. Uno de los hitos estructurales de este terrible panorama es la deuda de los países pobres que despedaza la vida de los humildes y de los más vulnerables. En este sentido, ayer hemos acá escuchado las 22 conferencias de América Latina y Caribe. Y existen algunos temas que son de todos. Primero, la corrupción es algo terrible. La situación del narcotráfico en América Latina y Caribe es una realidad terrible. Los ataques o las agresiones a la casa común es algo muy preocupante. Y después, algo que se presentó también como un grande desafío para nosotros es la situación de Haití, a donde las organizaciones internacionales, la ONU y la Organización de los Estados Americanos se olvidaron de esta realidad violenta y triste. Nuestra tradición católica y cristiana es esperanzar. Mas aún en los tiempos del Jubileo de la Esperanza. En diciembre de 2024, el Papa Francisco afirmaba que es necesario esperanzar a nuestra Madre Tierra, desfigurada por la lógica del beneficio, que llegue a serlo para los países más pobres, abrumados por deudas injustas. Que llegue a serlo para todos aquellos que son prisioneros de viejas y nuevas esclavitudes. La organización del papel me pidió una luz orientadora desde nuestra realidad brasileña y sudamericana. Solo puedo ofrecer unas pocas palabras de fe. Es, sin embargo, una fe animada por la continuidad de los pasos y de nuestras tradiciones, con el gran desafío que fue reiterado por el Papa León, quien insistió en la posible remisión entre la deuda pública y la deuda ecológica en su inicio de pontificado. No se trata de dos retos, no. Solo hay un cuidado para la casa común. El Papa Francisco ya había insistido en una invitación dirigida a las naciones más ricas para que reconozcan la gravedad de tantas decisiones tomadas y determinen condonar las deudas de los países que nunca podrán saldarlas. Antes que tratarse de magnanimidad, es una cuestión de justicia, agravada hoy por una nueva forma de iniquidad de la que hemos tomado conciencia. Porque hay una verdadera deuda ecológica, particularmente entre el norte y el sur, relacionada con desequilibrios comerciales, con consecuencias en el ámbito ecológico, así como con el uso desproporcionado de los recursos naturales llevados a cabo históricamente por algunos países. Como enseña la Sagrada Escritura, la tierra pertenece a Dios y todos nosotros habitamos en ella como extranjeros y huéspedes. Levítico 25, 23. Si verdaderamente queremos preparar en el mundo, el camino de la paz, esforcémonos por remediar las causas que originan las injusticias. Cancelemos las deudas injustas e insolutas y saciemos a los hambrientos. Papa Francisco. Pero tenemos que pasar del discurso a la acción. Es hora de más soluciones y menos discursos. En noviembre, la querida ciudad de Belém do Pará, la puerta de la Amazonía, será anfitrión de la COP30. Y debemos actuar como iglesia y como sociedad para que el significativo acontecimiento sea un camino para construir una esperanza concreta y real. Hay que hacer un trabajo extenso para que se superen las deudas de los más pobres como estrategia de superar nuestra crisis ecológica. Mas aún en Brasil, donde el Tratado de Deuda, un acuerdo político relevante, formó parte de los acuerdos alternativos que fueron formalizados por los gobiernos que participaron de la Cumbre de la Tierra de Río de Janeiro en 1992. En el Tratado de Deuda se establecía que la deuda ecológica planetaria del norte está constituida esencialmente por las relaciones económicas y comerciales basadas en la explotación de los recursos y sus impactos ecológicos, incluyendo el deterioro ambiental global, la mayor parte del cual es responsabilidad del norte, responsabilidad histórica. Tenemos que construir un pacto de los países y de toda la gente en un sentido global intergeneracional y de las injusticias socioambientales entre países y territorios con la remisión entre la deuda pública y la deuda ecológica. La COP30 es una oportunidad y una obligación de nuestra fe. Palabras y acciones deben ser parte de una gran conversión personal y social, pues nosotros, en medio de la oscuridad, tenemos que perseguir la luz de la evangelización, la fuerza que brota de la cruz y de la resurrección de Cristo. Sin esto, la iglesia es otra cosa. Una organización sin el espíritu, un grupo aristotélico, quizás sin la fuerza de la esperanza cristiana, para vivir el futuro ya en el presente, cambiándolo a punto de abrir nuevos caminos e infinitos horizontes. Nosotros acá en Brasil, antes de la celebración de la COP30, promovemos la celebración de pequeñas COP regionales. En este año, también durante el tiempo de la Cuaresma, nosotros tenemos una campaña llamada Campaña da Fraternidad. Y durante este tiempo de la Cuaresma, fuimos convidados a refletir sobre la cuestión de la casa común. He estado un tiempo privilegiado para llevar a todas las comunidades cristianas y católicas este tema que para nosotros es carísimo. Y los resultados son muy positivos. La iglesia ha hecho y está haciendo un trabajo muy intenso como preparación para la COP30. Yo creo que solamente, y creo que todos nosotros creemos el mismo, solamente el reino de Dios nos santifica como partícipes de la liberación a los cautivos y de las deudas. Que Dios nos ayude. Gracias.
Thank you, Cardinal Spangler, for that summary of some of the social realities that you and many other people around the world are living, and how the Brazilian Church is preparing now and for the coming COP30 meeting. Our next speaker this afternoon is Archbishop Gabriele Caccia, who is the permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations. He has served in the Vatican's diplomatic service since 1991, including as Apostolic Nuncio to Lebanon and the Philippines. At the UN, he actively represents the Church's positions on peace, development, and the protection of human dignity, including on issues of debt and economic justice. And he'll be offering a reflection this afternoon on multilateralism, debt, and dignity. Thank you, Archbishop Caccia.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you to all the panelists before me. Very interested what everyone has said from different perspectives. Your Eminence, distinguished panelists, participants, dear friends. It is a privilege to join you at this global town hall meeting today to mark the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, which falls in the Jubilee year of 2025. And these are not two separate occasions, but rather interconnected moments that call us to conversion, solidarity, and transformative action. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis highlighted that we are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis that is both social and environmental. And this insight has fundamentally reshaped how we understand our world and the responsibilities we hold within it. Pope Francis made clear that the ecological crisis cannot be addressed without confronting economic injustice, and economic injustice cannot be achieved without taking responsibility for our relationship with creation. The Jubilee year offered us an opportunity to apply these inherited visions to one of the most pressing moral issues of our time, the global debt crisis. The concept of Jubilee is deeply rooted in Scripture as a time of restoration when debts are forgiven and relationships are reconciled. In our time, this tradition speaks directly to the lived experience of millions across the globe. The current debt crisis represents a profound failure of our global economic system. To grasp the scale of the problem, consider the following stark realities. First, more than 50 nations are currently in or at high risk of debt distress. Second, as was already said, 3.3 billion people, that is almost half of the world's population, live in countries where the debt payments exceed spending on healthcare, education, and climate resilience combined. Third, in the very poorest nations, debt servicing costs are now 3 times higher than climate adaptation budgets. We must remember that these are not just statistics. They represent millions of men, women, and children trapped in cycles of poverty, vulnerability, and inequality. If a mother cannot access prenatal care because her government has cut healthcare spending to service debt, if children are sent home from their classroom when their teachers are not paid, and if communities cannot rebuild after disasters because resources are diverted to foreign creditors, we must acknowledge that there has been not just a serious economic failure, but a moral one. The mounting debt crisis has been made all the more severe by a new form of injustice, which we increasingly recognize, namely an ecological debt. It was very well explained before me. Pope Francis outlined the meaning of ecological debt first in Laudato Si, and again in Spes Non Confundit, the bull of the Jubilee year. He recognized that it is the nations who have contributed the least to climate change who bear its heaviest burdens, while simultaneously being crushed by financial obligation to wealthier nations. This creates a vicious cycle of injustice to which we see no immediate end. The global debt crisis, therefore, is not just a technical matter of economics. It is a clear hindrance to integral human development. It forces us to confront the question, what kind of international financial system do we want? One that protects the financial interests of the few, or one that protects human dignity and promotes the integral human development of all? This is a timely question. As we approach the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development next month in Spain, Seville, the international community has an opportunity to take bold and ambitious actions to transform debt into hope. It seems providential that the FFD4, 4th International Conference of Financing for Development, falls at the halfway point of the Jubilee year, which Pope Francis began with a call to wealthier nations to forgive the debts of those who will never be able to repay them. Our efforts at FFD4 must be guided by a renewed vision of multilateralism, where all nations, especially those most crushed by the burden of unsustainable debt, have an equal voice in shaping solutions to the debt crisis. We must root our discussions in solidarity and the common good and take bold steps towards correcting the injustice of unfair debts. The Holy See remains committed to fostering dialogue and collaboration among nations, faith communities, and civil society. As Pope Leo XIV reminds us very recently, I quote, "No one is exempted from striving to ensure respect for the dignity of every person, especially the most frail and vulnerable." End of quote. This is our shared mission. Together, we can turn the Jubilee vision of hope into tangible action, ensuring that no one is left behind, as we say in the UN system, in our shared pursuit of a more just world that protects the dignity of every person and promotes true integral development of all. And I thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop Caccia, for that reflection on the serious nature of the debt crisis and the questions it poses for what kind of economic system the world wants. We're moving now to the second section of the program on rallying support through the key political moments of this year. And the main speaker in this program coming next will be Professor Martin Guzman, who is a professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University and an expert on sovereign debt and debt crisis resolution. He is also a member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, where he has spearheaded an initiative with Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, focused on advancing reforms and solutions for sustainable economic, social, and environmental development in the Global South. Professor Guzman, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. All right, I hope you can see well the slides. Great. So my presentation is going to focus on the motivations and the reasons behind the creation of the so-called Jubilee Commission, which is a commission that Pope Francis commanded us to create last year that is producing a report on how to address the current debt, development, and climate crisis in the developing world, and more generally, how to propose reforms for the international financial architecture so we're not again in the same place in the next Jubilee, say in 2050. The Commission has 33 members, 33 global experts on debt and development. It has been meeting over the last few months, almost a year, multiple times in different parts of the world. And the report will be presented on June 20 at the Vatican at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. So let me begin with the timing of the Jubilee Commission. The timing couldn't be better because the situation is getting worse. The crisis is not being properly addressed, and the evolution of the global economy creates more troubles for developing countries, as we will see. And unfortunately, there is certain complacency and misinformation that has consequences for the timing of the debt policies that are needed for addressing this crisis. There is a responsibility on all sides. There was responsibility at the time these debts were incurred. Many countries borrow for the first time in international credit markets after the US financial crisis, the North Atlantic financial crisis of 2008. There was abundant liquidity, as we economists say, a lot of money around in the world, and investors were searching for higher returns on the money. So they lent at high interest rates with short periods of repayments, short maturity to the developing countries. And the governments decided also to borrow. And now also it's both the creditor side that doesn't want to engage in debt restructurings and the debtors that are reluctant to initiate debt restructurings because of the political cost that they entail in the short term that explain why the crisis is not being addressed. So despite certain narratives that try to be placed in the global sphere, the reality is that Pope Francis' call for that relief was absolutely on point. It was absolutely the right thing to do. Let me show you the data of what's going on. We have today 54 countries that spend more than 10% of their tax revenues on that interest, on interest payments. This is a lot. A country, typically, well, my country, when it was paying 10% of tax revenues on that, it had one of its worst economic and social crises in history in 2001. When you see this figure, what we have to understand is that precious resources for economic development, a significant amount is being assigned to meeting payments of unsustainable debt. The burden of interest came up 50% since 2015. And today, 3.3 billion people live in countries that spend more on debt than on health. And 2.1 billion people live in countries that spend more on debt than on education. So this is a real development crisis. In 2014, according to the IMF, 27%, IMF and World Bank, 27% of low-income countries were at risk of debt distress. Now that figure is 52%. And the number of countries that are already in distress, meaning that they are not repaying the debt, went from 4 to 11, and it should be actually higher. As you will see, what's going on is that these countries resort to actions that ensure that payment over other critical expenses that should be the priority. So market access meaning access to international credit markets remains prohibitively expensive for many low and lower middle income countries today. And sometimes we hear that when a country manages to refinance a loan at double-digit interest rates, we hear that was a successful resolution of that situation, and that's far from being the case. A country that borrows or refinances debts at double-digit interest rates is a country that it aggravates its troubles. Its troubles, not just for the macroeconomy, for the economic activity in the short term, but more seriously for medium and long-term economic, social, and human development. The global context is adverse. The growth forecasts are were revised down recently. For instance, for developing countries, IMF revised the forecast of growth down to 3.7% in 2025 and 3.9% in 2026. So the situation looks gloomier today than it looked 6 months ago, and it was already dramatic 6 months ago. So this it creates bigger problems of that sustainability. There is a key feature of the global financial system, which is that the developing countries get financing when the global times are good. But when there is more global uncertainty, money flows out of developing countries to the advanced world. This means that capital flows are pro-cyclical, we economists say, for developing countries. You get them when they are least needed, and you lose them when they are mostly needed. So the system favors the advanced economies that get the possibility of doing counter-cyclical policies when they need it. And that's not the case in the developing world. The data is very clear. Since 2022, the outflows, meaning money that goes out of the developing countries on debt that has maturity longer than a year, that's called long-term debt, were massive outflows, money that is leaving from the developing countries, $52 billion in 2022 and $30 billion in 2023. The net transfers from multilateral development banks and international financial institutions de facto are used, because money is fungible, to ensure that private creditors and other creditors, but mostly private creditors, get repaid. And that's money that should be used for addressing poverty, building the infrastructure that the countries need for tackling poverty and for economic development and for recovery policies. So that's not the case. In the last couple of years, or actually the last 3 years, the flows have become negative with the IMF as well, meaning that the countries are sending more money to the IMF than what the IMF sends to those countries. And that has to do with the fact that because in the pandemic, countries borrow more, now it's the time in which they are amortizing the debts and paying interest. And the interest of the IMF is high because it includes surcharges and extra cost for countries that borrow above certain level or that have the debt outstanding for longer than certain periods. So they were reduced last year, but still they are high. So this is the big picture. Countries are experiencing outflows mainly to the private sector, and they're financing those payments through cuts in investments in education, investments in health, more generally, investments in economic and social development. And by using the money that they receive, the financing that they receive by the international financial institutions. So the situation is truly dramatic, and in that context, Pope Francis called for that justice in the year of the Jubilee, and we are all very hopeful about the role that Pope Leo XIV will play in the year of the Jubilee. And he had, as I explained, he had commanded us, both members of the Pastiles and me, to create this commission. We look forward to presenting this report on June 20 at the Vatican, and I hope we can all join efforts to avoid falling into a situation like the one Latin America went through in the 1980s, in which there was a serious debt crisis, but the global narrative was not appropriate, was not reflecting the true reality because of the vested interest at play until the late 80s. So there was a lost decade for Latin America, and Eastern European countries also suffered very significantly. We are now seeing half of a lost decade in many African countries and countries from Latin America and the Caribbean, and we must change this. Clearly, current debt policies are serving more financial markets than the people, and this is a consequence of a global systemic and moral failure. So I hope we can all join efforts to change global narratives and to push leaders to do the right thing in all fronts, and therefore address this crisis urgently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Guzman. Thank you for that helpful overview, and I think we'll all be looking for the release of your report in just a few weeks now. So we're moving now to the third section of the program about rallying public engagement this year. The main speaker in this section will be Ms. Lucy Asipila, who is the Executive Secretary of Caritas Africa, coordinating Catholic social action across 46 African countries. With over a decade of experience in the Caritas network, she has led regional advocacy efforts and engaged in international advocacy at the United Nations, speaking out strongly on the current debt crisis. Ms. Asipila, welcome.
Thank you so much, Joshua. And please confirm if you can hear me. Okay, thank you. I was really happy to listen to Professor Guzman and the issues that he has raised. And one of the things that he pointed out was some governments are spending more on debt than on education. And it reminds me of the trip that we made to Zimbabwe the other day with the colleagues from Caritas Internationalis and Caritas Africa. We were in the Diocese of Mutare, where we were monitoring the implementation of an emergency project. And I remember one of our colleagues from Caritas Internationalis asking the children in this school, what is their dream? And they mentioned that some want to be a doctor, some want to be a teacher, some want to be a lawyer. But you look at the context within they operate, it's really quite difficult because they are not able to pay school fees of about $50 and able to access education because of debt. It's a challenge. And this is why we should support this campaign, Turn Debt into Hope, because we are giving people hope. We are turning debt into hope. And this is exactly why we need to support this campaign. It is for moral and humanitarian reasons. I'll highlight some issues like, for example, the lack of public services pushes people into poverty. People are not able to access healthcare. If you were to tell any one person today that they have cancer within this act, it's a challenge for them because they will not be able to access the health services required. Social protection services become a challenge, and also we need to cancel debt so that we can be able to free up the resources needed to fight poverty and improve lives. And we see most of the speakers have highlighted from when Alistair spoke to the last speaker about the unjust debt burdens. And most of these debts are incurred under unfair conditions. And the reason why we should support this campaign is for us to keep raising awareness that there are countries which are finding themselves in this trap, this cycle, where they have to keep paying debt with interest rates which are far higher than those which are offered to wealthier countries. And money keeps flowing from these countries which are developing. I am here in Burkina Faso right now, and the one thing that you see from the minute that you land is the need for infrastructure, the need for development so that we can facilitate access, so governments are able to facilitate access to basic things. And you can see it is visible the minute you enter the country about the development needs in the country. And if we keep getting stuck in this cycle, we are not able to provide the basic infrastructure that people will need to access markets, to access health services, to access education. It is also a global justice issue. If we reflect on the historical injustices and the current regimes which stem from way back, look at the World Trade Organization and the policies over there which place Africa at a structural disadvantage. And they are not able to trade fairly within the international trading systems. And these trade terms, they are really exploitative. And there are also dimensions of extractivism where there are natural resources and they are being exploited, but do not benefit the communities themselves who are even close to these resources. And this is the reason why we should turn debt into hope. If we are going to cancel debt, we are freeing up resources, and communities who are hoping to get access to health care, they are hoping to get education. Older persons who are hoping to get social protection services, they get hope. And this is the reason why we need to support this. There's also some dimensions of economic development. You visit most of these African countries and you see there are a lot of multinational corporations operating there, but the domestic dimension is not as strong. And how do we support some of these countries to free up resources so that they can support simple things such as the domestic textile industry, the local farmers who are out there farming tomatoes, potatoes, and they are not able to compete with the imports which come in. I remember last week mentioning that Africa imports about 85% of its food, and we have 64% of the world's arable land. This is because of these imbalances. And when we turn debt into hope, it means we are freeing up resources for farmers to get the kind of hope that they need, that they will be able to sell, that there won't be surplus, for people to access food so that we can address the issues such as malnutrition, and we can be able to visit, to see investment and growth. Another thing, it's about, if you're not able to pay debt, it means that you will default. And this is a very uncomfortable situation for any one government to find themselves in. So these issues of defaulting continue to be a challenge and continues to be a debt trap that we are finding ourselves in. So let's see how to continue to negotiate and raise awareness on this, because it has been done before. Another dimension is instability, because people can only tolerate these things for so long. When they start noticing, oh, we are not able to access health, we are not able to get our education, we are unemployed. Universities are releasing a number of graduates who are not able to access employment, and they will stay at home. And what happens, these things fuel a lot of anger and instability. And the next thing you see, there will be social protests. If you check in the news, in several African countries, this is what has been happening, protests because of the fiscal policy, which they do not seem to understand. And our role as civil society actors, as this church, is for us to raise awareness so that we are able to break down this complex topic, so that people are able to understand when our governments are borrowing, this is the impact. And when people come to us to engage us so that we vote for them and we put them in policy, in decision-making positions, we need to understand what are their proposals in terms of addressing this particular issue. And lastly, I'd like to mention one other dimension, maybe two. By canceling debt, we promote international solidarity, and we show that we understand the different challenges that people are facing. And lastly, we've been discussing for years and years about climate change. Within the context of Africa, the emissions on our side are not so high, and we need to free up resources so that we can be able to channel investments towards climate change adaptation and mitigation. So I love that this campaign talks about turning debt into hope. And when you pardon a debt, even yourself, if you've borrowed some money somewhere and someone tells you, oh, do not pay me, use this for something else, you're giving someone a sense of hope. So let's keep on raising awareness on this campaign so that we can be able to free resources for the people who need them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sipila. It's been very helpful to hear your perspective on turning debt into hope and on freeing resources for people who need them on the ground. We're now going to turn over to Caritas Internationalis' International Advocacy and Campaign Coordinator, Liam Finn, for the presentation of a video.
Thank you very much, Joshua, and thank you to all our panelists and our participants today in this global town hall. It's great to have everybody join us and reflect on how we can turn debt into hope this Jubilee year. What we want to do now is to show how people have been responding to the call from Pope Francis and now from Pope Leo to say no to an economy that excludes people and embeds poverty, and instead to cancel unjust debts and reform financial systems to prevent such poverty being created by debt crises again. And this is through an activity that we at Caritas Internationalis have billed as a relay of hope. In essence, communities across more than 40 countries have gathered to share the light of a candle and have symbolically passed this around the world, reflecting on how tackling the global debt crisis will spread hope, the hope of the Jubilee, around the world. So we want to show you a very short video that includes messages from many of the groups who've taken part in recent days. And we know that many more groups in countries across Oceania Africa, and North America will be taking part in the Relay of Hope today. So here's the video coming up, and we hope you enjoy seeing how people have responded to the Turn Debt into Hope campaign. And thank you also to everyone who's participated in the Relay of Hope so far. I apologize. I apologize if we've had some sound problems with showing this video. I hope that we can show this. We can put a link in the chat. People might be able to watch this on YouTube, but it's also something we'll be sharing on our social media channels over the coming days. And we're hoping to receive more clips from people taking part in the Relay of Hope around the world over the coming days. So thank you again to everyone who's done so in so many countries around the world. We've had people in more than 40 countries take part in the Relay of Hope. And it really shows the global scale of the call to turn debt into hope. So thank you once again, and we hope that we'll go ahead in the Jubilee year to realise our dream of turning debt into hope. Thank you.
I think this is the portion of the afternoon where we're going to have a few minutes here for questions for people who want to ask questions. I think you could go ahead and ask your questions in the chat there. If you might be able to, identify who you would be asking the question of, that might be helpful. And then myself and others will help try to ask a few of those questions as we have some time now. I'm seeing a first question come in the chat from someone in Peru who is asking if someone on the panel could speak about what practically speaking can people in a diocese or a parish in a country like Peru do to put pressure on wealthy countries to cancel debt. I'm not sure if anyone of our speakers will be able to field that question or offer some thoughts.
Hello, John.
I'm happy to jump in.
That question.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the question. I think there's a number of different things that local communities can do. So one of the things that we are asking Caritas communities worldwide, as well as other groups from climate and development groups, is to very simply sign the petition and make the petition known as widely as possible. Once the petition is signed, we're also asking people to publicize it. So, for example, to post their petition signed on their social media channels, wherever they are. We are using LinkedIn, Twitter, X, and Instagram. And at the same time, invite others in that community to make the petition known to as many people as possible at a local level. So asking people to try and translate the Turn Debt into Hope campaign into plain English, into smaller bits that are more easily understandable at a local level. Like my colleague Lucia Sipila from Caritas Africa said earlier, I think the challenge for us and for communities worldwide is to try and understand the debt issue is not just a technical issue or a far-fetched problem for policymakers high above. It is a matter for people to be able to go to school, to be trained as a teacher, to be trained as a doctor, to be able to drive to their workplace, to be able to run a climate action kind of project wherever they are. So I think there's ample margin for local communities to really popularize the Turn Debt into Hope campaign in a context-specific way, especially in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and in the Pacific, where the effects of climate change are also, more visible. One other aspect I think from experience is absolutely relevant, and I'm happy to be speaking on behalf of our colleagues in Caritas Oceania. Small island Caritas groups, for example, are making the connection between debt and climate, and I think that's also very important. We know from research that the countries that are most indebted are also those who are most affected by the debt crisis, by the climate crisis. So one other activity, if you like, that you could be suggesting on a local level is to make that known. That's as simple as that. So maybe by organizing a social media engagement activity with younger people. Younger people are usually also more sensitive to these issues, as demographics from Caritas Internationalis's good practices show all the time. You can see in the chat box, and thanks Maureen for putting that up in the chat box. The Turn Debt into Hope campaign is available in English, French, and Spanish. You can download key facts and figures about the debt crisis now. I think our stellar speakers today, one after the other, have emphasized that we have a global debt crisis, but this crisis is a silent crisis. So we really need, through the Turn Debt into Hope campaign, to make it known. So that's our job, to exert public pressure wherever possible. And the other thing that I think it would be interesting to mention now is that many other groups are organizing pilgrimages. So that's also an activity that's been, tried and tested in Jubilee years. Catholic communities, wherever they are used to organize going on a pilgrimage to a significant cathedral or to Ministry of Finance, etc., and maybe to turn a candle altogether to illustrate what it means to be supporting a global campaign on debt relief. So I don't want to with more ideas, but I think there are simply many, many different activities that can be organized and designed at a local level, so long as they are context specific and they're not too technical. We've seen time and again that global campaigns can absolutely be successfully translated and enacted. Thank you. I hope that helps. And I'll hand over to Alistair.
Sorry, yeah, just to add, I'm trying to move into the camera. Just to add to what Alfonso was just saying, I mean, it really depends what country you're in and what the context is. So at a global level, there are 1.4 billion Catholics. And now we have many who are getting involved from other Christian denominations and from other faiths, and then beyond into the non-faith groups. And I think the first thing is to reflect on the consequences of debt within your country. And as Alfonso was saying, to really articulate what is particularly if you are a country which is largely in debt, or where the debt is causing distress, to articulate what are the consequences of that distress? How is this playing out? What is the human cost of debt? And I think you can do that reflections within your communities, do it with dioceses, you can do it with your bishops' conferences, and you can do it more broadly with wider civil society. I think you can look at how to translate this campaign, as Alfonso was saying, and publicize it within, obviously, the Catholic dioceses and parishes, the Catholic faithful, but way beyond that, to engage ecumenically and in interfaith groups and with broader civil society to get more and more people exercised about the importance of tackling the debt crisis. Also, within your countries, you can talk to your own governments and give them the data and examples they need when they're going to some of the global conferences. So I think it was Archbishop Catcher who mentioned the Seville conference on development finance, which is in July. There will be the UN General Assembly in September. There will be the climate conference, COP, in November. World leaders are going to be coming together, and all of these issues feed one another and intersect. So if you can be briefing your governments and getting them to come to these conferences ready to speak out, that is where the battle will be won. It will be won in your own capitals before they get on planes to come. And conversely, if you're in wealthier countries where perhaps debt distress isn't so much of the issue, but where the debt is held, where the money has been borrowed, or countries which perhaps benefit more from the financial system, then you can engage with your own governments there and bring to your own governments the case for why the debt crisis has to be tackled. Sorry, the last thing I wanted to say, which was actually in the poorer countries, as well as engaging your own governments, there are embassies of all of the countries that are invested in this economic system. So you can make appointments and go and talk to the British ambassador or the American ambassador or the Swiss or the French or the German. All of these embassies, you can go and make your case so that they relay that back to their own capitals. So really, in general, the first thing is to mobilize the Catholic community, then the ecumenical community, then the interfaith, then broader civil society at a grassroots level, lift it up, take it into your capitals so that your governments and the embassies understand the issue, and then we can bring it up to a global level. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I think maybe we'll highlight one more question here before we close the Q&A and prepare to close this event. We have a question earlier from someone with CAFOD in the UK about countries not actually defaulting on their debts, but defaulting on their development responsibilities. She's asking in particular if Professor Guzman would be able to discuss how that plays into the discussion.
Absolutely. So that's actually what's going on. The countries are resorting to cuts in critical expenses like education and health, and using the money, which is money is fungible, we know, from international financial institutions to make sure that they repay debts. And we have to remember that those debts were incurred at high interest rates. So they have an interest rate that included a compensation for risk, and risk materialized. We had COVID-19, then the war in Ukraine, and the response of the central banks of the advanced economies, which was to increase the interest rates and therefore drain liquidity, drain money from the rest of the world. And that led to unsustainable debt burdens for many countries. And the creditors had been compensated for the possibility that those events could happen. But the problem is that the contracts don't stipulate what are the circumstances under which the debt payments should not occur. So when the creditor gets a chance to get repaid, of course, it's the best the creditor can do, get repaid. So creditors are not going to push for a solution to this problem. It has to be the governments, and there has to be conditions in the lending of the international financial institutions to ensure that the money is not used to repay unsustainable debt. So overall, what we need is to change the structure of incentives to push creditors to participate in restructurings and to push governments to initiate those restructurings. And if I may add one more thing related to Alfonso's responses, the main problem in this big crisis is silence. When the crisis is silent, there's no solution. It's key to win the global narrative over what's going on. Silence plays in favor of delaying the resolution of that crisis. It plays in favor of continue pushing for cuts in education, health, infrastructure investments, and using money from international financial institutions for bailouts of creditors, of holders of unsustainable bonds and debt in general. So, in order to go from where we are now to a situation in which real action happens more quickly and more effectively, there needs to be more noise, more knowledge of what's going on around the world.
Professor, before we let you go, I think there's one more question you might be able to help with, and that's someone asking if there's a list of the key creditors that people should consider pressuring or writing to or working with.
Good. So the situation today, the universe of creditors is very different than in the 1980s. In the 1980s, the main creditors were the banks, American banks mostly, other banks from other countries. The universe of creditors evolved with the emergence of bonds as the main source of financing, and also the emergence of new official creditors. So it's not just the Paris Club creditors on the official sector, but the new non-Paris Club creditors that are also part of the landscape. The biggest one, of course, is China, but not the only one. So the landscape of creditors, the change in the landscape of creditor affects the characteristics of a debt crisis resolution. When we focus on private creditors, it's mostly investment funds and hedge funds. one of the key problems, one of the key asymmetries in the system is the transparency or opaqueness. So the creditors know a lot about the debtor, almost everything, but the debtor may not even know who its private creditors are because bonds are traded in secondary markets, and not every creditor has institutional frameworks or governance frameworks that makes mandatory the disclosure of the bonds that they hold. So I mean, I can give you an example. I was the finance minister of Argentina that negotiated $110 billion of debt in 2020. And I had no clue at the beginning who were our creditors, at least a large fraction I didn't know. You don't know until you sign a non-disclosure agreement and you start to negotiate formally, and the creditors that engage and sign the non-disclosure agreement have to reveal who they are, of course, because they sign. But the part of the problem is that many times the debtor doesn't even know who its creditors are when it comes to the private sector creditors.
Okay, and I think we're going to take one more final question before we close out the question and answer here. Someone bringing up a question about the effectiveness or power of governments in the global south to advocate for debt relief or to advocate for wide debt cancellation, when they may also be facing, other serious crises in their countries or have other things they need to address. Not sure who would be the best answer if someone wants to offer an answer to that.
I'm happy to offer a final word before I leave and then leave others to complement my answer. So first, don't get me wrong with the previous answer. We do know that there are important investment funds and hedge funds besides the official creditors that hold debt of the developing countries in crisis today. But the point that I make is that when we talk about reforms in the international financial architecture, more transparency on the creditor side will be a very welcome reform. On the second point, what countries from the South can do in the context of that we have now with this set of creditors. So it's important to understand that when a country continues repaying unsustainable debt by resorting to just cuts austerity on education, health, the country is not only affecting local medium-term development, but that also hurts economic activity in the short term. Therefore, it contracts imports. And that means that there are companies in other parts of the world that sell less. So there is a conflict between trade and finance. And the conflict between trade and finance means that in the creditor countries, if the financial interests are favored, it means that the workers will get affected in the creditor countries, because if the companies sell less, they will hire less workers, there will be less activity. So in these processes, what is important is to also engage at the local level in the countries in crisis with the companies that export to those countries. Because many times those companies have the money being managed by the same investment funds that are the creditors of the country. And that's many times overlooked, but it's a very important aspect for changing the equilibrium from going to lack of action to action in a debt crisis.
Well, thank you. And I think we're going to close the Q&A here to try to close on time. Again, my name is Joshua McElwee. I'm the Vatican correspondent for Reuters. It's been very good to be with all of you today. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you for all of you being here. And I'll pass back to Caritas to let them close the event.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to again thank you and thank all of our speakers today. I'd like to just remind everybody that there's going to be a recording of today's Global Town Hall. We have the email addresses of those who have registered and then participated. So we'll see to it that those who have registered receive a recording of today's session and event. Please do use the website of the campaign as much as possible, and do let if you plan on utilizing the campaign wherever you are based, and join the campaign. As you will see from the official campaign website, there's an interactive map. We are more than happy to include any further endorsing organizations or individuals who are happy to be promoting the campaign in the future. I'm looking at my director. Any concluding remarks? Not really.
No, not really. Just to say thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it informative. And really just a last appeal, please do get involved. And if we could really build vibrant campaigns in each of your countries and bring that together, we can really pack a punch. And 1.4 billion people is an incredible target to set for ourselves, okay? All around the world, let's see how many we can get involved and get exercised about the issue of debt justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.